in intellectual property and trademarks, besides multiple other certifications in technology, data science, digital transformation, and Industry 4.0. He is also certified by Government of India for enabling cities with smart digital technologies. Indrajit is a fellow of Royal Society of Arts, Manufacturers and Commerce, Royal Statistical Society, and IEEE. He has worked for some of the top organizations globally like PwC, KPMG, Accenture, Nomura, etc. He has also founded a successful startup in the early part of his career, which got acquired by a global tech giant. He's also published author in the areas of smart utilities, data science, AI, and transformation, and has 25 years of experience. In the past, he has worked with Aviva, Schneider Electric, Invensys Operations Management, Cognizant Technology Solutions, MESA International, TCS, etc. He's a chemical engineer from IIT Bombay and also MS in Environmental Engineering from University of Iowa. Let us welcome Mr. Kamal Ajitsaria to this panel as well. Another speaker that we have and panelist is Mr. Aditya P. Datta, who is Executive IT Architect, AI and Automation from IBM. Aditya is a passionate technology leader, well known to conceptualize and deploy cutting-edge artificial intelligence and cloud-powered solutions at large enterprises. Mr. Milind Swarup, who is a strategy consultant at Intuity Consulting LLP. Milind graduated from the Indian School of Business with a dual MBA specialization in finance and strategy and industry specialization in public policy. He completed his bachelor's degree in mining engineering from the Indian Institute of Technology, BHU. I will request our panelists to share their points of view about the panel, and I will request Dr. Indranil Mitra to start sharing his views and then followed by others. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, everybody. It's been a long introduction and it's becoming too heavy. So thank you for inviting me here and having PwC represent some of the thoughts that they have around this world of VUCA. So to just lighten up the room a bit, how many of you know what VUCA means and when did this term come into play? But no prizes for guessing the right answer. Anybody in the audience? I don't want Ambrish sir to speak about it because I'll tell you why. No hands up as of now. So just to speeden up the things, VUCA is VUCA is volatile. Okay, you know. C, anybody? A, ambiguous. I'll just finish it. So way back, the unfortunate incident of 2001 led the US Army term this situation of very radically different warfare which was waged across the globe in the form of terrorism. They called it VUCA. VUCA was then taken into the business world by Mr. Johansson of Institute of Future Studies and brought into the business realm. I heard about it first time around 2013-14 from my esteemed teacher in consulting, Ambrish sir, when we started to do projects around this. So I'll not go into much of the details, etc., but I think VUCA has been very clearly brought to fore by a couple of very recent incidents or happenings across the world. One is the COVID pandemic, and the other is the going on war in Ukraine, in Central Europe, by Mr. Gautam Adani himself. And you've seen what he's built out of all the uncertainties and how the world is changing. From a perspective of consulting organization, that's what I spoke to Dr. Bose, that I'll speak about it because we have other leaders who will speak about technologies that surround this VUCA world like AI, machine learning, and sentient organizations. In this scenario of COVID was to help the government of India transport the oxygen that was produced in various parts of the world. This is during the second COVID wave, and you've seen the horrific scenarios that played out across the country in various hospitals, various states, I think all across India. And to cater to the peaking oxygen demand, the government had to transform multiple factories into oxygen producing ones. That is when The government worked with the national disaster management systems, the railways, and the trucks that were plied by government workers across the country to transport this oxygen. We help them, in a very small way to actually simulate, find out the right routes, the best production facilities to the nearest hospital hubs. We're very proud to do that, and I think that led to saving some lives. At least we could be proud of that. And that is one project. We consultants always charge a lot of money, hours and rates. But the one project which I think PwC went ahead and did with the government for the nation. See, the other one which we are doing right now is one of the largest lending institution in the world, which does a lot of lending to the governments and countries. This is for the future commodity trades across nations, not only India, but all its 5 nations nearby it and extending as long as Thailand.
Your Saturday morning here, I want to make sure that I can share some new information with you, which you have not, let's say, something new with you and you learned something. Okay, so the topic of our panel is, how we can use analytics, data to, survive or compete in this VUCA world, right? It's a term given. So I've been with Adani Group for 5 years now. All of you know Adani for different reasons. You go to their airport, they produce electricity, they are into ports business, they are into cement business. The part of business that I will talk about today is the energy, right? And how energy is going through a transition, right? I can relate it very well to the VUCA world that we talk about, right? Now, how is energy transition? It's the same electricity that you have been using since your childhood, right? But behind the scene, a lot of things are changing, right? The electricity you get today, maybe 3, 4, 5 years back, it was all through coal. You are burning coal and you are getting the electricity. Today, almost 25% of that, and we still have a long way to go, comes from renewable resources like sun and wind, right? Now, why is that, right? Because the world on the environment side, on the climate side has become very volatile, right? You have heard about global warming, so I'm not going into that. But that is what is driving this transition. So what's the uncertainty element of it, right? The uncertainty element of it is when you have coal or when you are on nuclear power or any of those conventional resources, there's certainty. You need electricity, you need more electricity, you burn more coal and you get more electricity. But now when you go to renewable world, right, you are dependent on the elements of nature. What that means, right? You can produce solar energy only when there is sun, right? You can produce wind energy only when there is wind blowing. Otherwise, so if you think of it as a supply chain, the raw material for an energy world today is your sun rays and your wind. Both of them you cannot control. There's a lot of uncertainty, right? But you will not expect or accept as a consumer that your electricity supply suddenly goes away because there's cloud cover. So we as an energy producer need to manage that uncertainty in the supply chain, right? And there's a heavy penalty on us if we cannot produce as per the forecast. So that means we need to be able to forecast and share with government agencies 24 hours in advance how much electricity we are going to produce over next 24 hours. We provide that information in slots of 15 minutes each, and the accuracy that is expected from us is about 5%. So that means over next 24 hours, I should be able to forecast how much I will be able to convert the solar, the sun rays and the wind into electricity and supply to the grid. It's very difficult to do that in a manual way. You cannot do it without data. You cannot do it without using some advanced analytics capability. So that is the part of uncertainty. Complexity of the supply chain for us or the supply network has also immensely increased. Earlier, you had 5 plants. Now, from where you would produce, let's say, 10 gigawatt of electricity. Now to produce the same 10 gigawatt of electricity, today in Adani, we have 33 million solar panels. We have 8,000 windmills. And they're all distributed across India, right? So how do you manage that complexity of assets? The total amount invested in those assets today is about $9 billion. That's a lot of money that you have deployed, and the life cycle of each of these projects is probably about 25 years. So you need to figure out how you are going to run your operations of $9 billion. Every gigawatt of electricity is about $1 billion of investment over 25 years. So there are a lot of decisions you have to make where your return over 25 years will be dependent on. You cannot do that manually. You need to do very good modeling of the environment 25 years down the line. How much energy, how is the long-term wind pattern going to change at a particular location? How is the sun or how is the cloud cover going to change over next 25 years?
This was fascinating, right? Kamal sirs and Mr. Indra Nils. I got lost in visualizing how you described. I will start by saying that I work for IBM, a business and technology consulting organization, right? But recent times or last few years, what I see is in my discussions with the senior executives of the customers that I work with, the customer organizations that I work with, they are very similar to Kamal sir here, right? What we are talking with them is technology is solved. Technology is probably the easiest part of the equation, right? And why I say so? In the world of VUCA, you are trying to balance each of these parameters, right? The complexity versus the other ambiguity, the uncertainty, etc. Right? There is no perfect answer. You're trying to balance it such that and navigate it such that you are going towards some goals. Earlier, or to some extent, of course, the goal is efficient production, efficient operations, automation, profitability, etc. But more and more, the executives that I speak to, they are talking about more subtle themes, more subtle goals, which is about not only sustainability, of course that is there, but more human values, the human impact of change, the balancing factor that says, let's add a values dimension to Industry 4.0. I know the European Commission says it's Industry 5.0. I'm not going to the terminology aspects of it. But what is fascinating, what is heartening to me as a person is these large organizations, these are million, billion-dollar companies and their senior executives who deal with profit and loss with very large dollar figures and have an ability to influence a large parts of humanity across the developed and underdeveloped world, right? So when they start talking about their priority becomes, what are the human values, what are the impact that this technology will have on the human beings that who would get influenced by them. That's a very good world we are moving into, right? So there is, for example, a situation where we had a very large beer company, right? Difficult to imagine that it would have a lot of conscience, but it does. It's a very serious legal business, right? And that executives, their problem statement was that they source lot of things, lot of supplies from Africa. And the problem was that not they themselves as the brand, I will not name the brand, but not they themselves as the brand, but the subcontractor, subcontractor who were dealing with supplies from Africa, they were not empathetic to those populations, right? If you have seen movies like Blood Diamond, etc., these can be, when they come from the large organization, if the supply chain can be sometime blood-sucking, unfortunately, right? And these executives are worried about it. Not worried only about the brand, yes, that is, but also I could see from them and on first hand that they are worried about the human impact to those societies. So what did we do? We brought in technology to look at the contracts that these subcontractors had with the middle level contractors to the main brand. We applied AI and natural language technologies to figure out whether these had enough both affirmative as well as negative clauses to see that checks and balances are there, that the humanity is not played around with, right? Is there a repression going on? Is it something that is negative in terms of impact to the contractor or the people who would supply? Are the labor clauses right or wrong, right? So we applied those to see whether there are hits and misses within the whole contract definitions to make those contractors better, the contract documents better for the society. Similarly, the largest shipper in the world, again I will not name but you would know, they ship huge quantities of fruit from South America to Europe. Some of you who may have visited Europe or may have seen in screens or maybe sometimes now in India as well, think of the banana fruit basket piles in a large shopping mall. When I went to Europe for the first time, I was amazed. I mean, are these real bananas, or how does each and every one of them look exactly the same? How is the shade exactly the same? I was not exposed to it. In India, you have all the spectrum in a shop, right? And you choose the good ones, right? That's how it was. In European shopping mall, each and every banana, the one, just take a random pick, it would be exactly the same as the other one. And this is across the other shop that is across the road or in the other city. How does that work? When we worked with this very large shipper, we realized that it's a selection going on, right? So Walmart in Europe or any other such large mart in Europe would have a threshold of quality that it would just reject all other fruit. And herein comes the balance of technology versus humanity. There is beautiful technology today to better reject anything that is not on the threshold. But earlier it used to go down the waste basket or really not reach human being in an edible state. What we are able to do now is check and monitor the humidity and the temperature using IoT in the large, the truck-sized refrigerated boxes that you would see on the ships when it starts its journey from South America. So you can have continuous monitoring of those containers to exactly know, and also you have biological parameters to figure out that whether this fruit would decay or not decay at the end of the journey. You are also able to predict. Based on that, we provide the ability to the shipper or the end contractor who has asked for that shipping to happen to reroute that banana to another country. If Walmart, because of EU regulations, wouldn't accept in one country, can it accept in another? It's perfectly edible. It's perfectly required. There is a lot of people who should have it, right? But due to whatever reasons, it doesn't get accepted here. So can we get it somewhere else?
It's about various aspects of IoT and others during Industry 4.2 and how it helps to manage the different challenges of the way forward.
Thank you, Professor Bose, for the kind introduction. First, I would like to thank everyone who is in the room, in the audience, my esteemed co-panelists. So when we talk about the VUCA world, the famous Russian revolutionary and the founder of erstwhile USSR, Lenin, he said more than 100 years ago that sometimes there are decades when nothing happens and sometimes there are weeks when decades happen. So luckily or unluckily, depending on how you see it, how you see this world, do you see it as a challenge or as an opportunity? But we are living in unprecedented times. We are living in a period of churn. There's a great power rivalry emerging after a 3-decade unipolar world. Now, this kind of churn, what it does is that it opens up the possibilities of different relations where nations and businesses, they scramble to reorient themselves. In more peaceful times, businesses act to stabilize relations between countries. They act as a positive force in maintaining peace. But in such era of churn, geopolitics and great power ambitions take the front seat. And then businesses have to be ready to shift their supply chains, their businesses, their factories, depending on the emerging situation. Now, one example that I'd like to point out is that when Ukraine war happened and Russia, got economic sanctions imposed, an opportunity opened up for India to shift its oil import basket, because it was getting discounted oil from Russia. So what it did was, rather than taking the bulk of its oil from Middle East, it moved to Russia. Now that is a shifting of entire supply chain. You don't just have to, it's not like just you're buying vegetables. You have to orient tankers, you have to fine tune your refinery. So all that has to be done within a few weeks or months so that you can take advantage of that opportunity. In the COVID era, while the pandemic was on, there was a retail chain in US, Target. What happened that while all retail chains were struggling to meet the customer demand, this retail chain was excelling in its performance. Hence, its shares quadrupled within a matter of weeks or months. This happened because its supply chain was digitally ready. It was able to respond to its customers' need better than anyone else was. Several years ago, talking of another example, several years ago when Google and Apple Pay disrupted the finance industry or the credit card industry, Visa and MasterCard, they responded by co-opting technology. They collaborated with fintech disruptors, made APIs to be able to process payments of the fintech disruptors through their platform. American Express chose not to do so. After a decade, American Express, which was a leading payment platform, is at 20th position. So one decision, Visa and MasterCard, they did not bring any new technology or any innovation. They just co-opted a technology which was already there. So the difference was digital mindset. They were ready to co-opt something, ingest that. So I spent a few years, trying to co-opt this kind of technology in mining sector where I was working. I always felt the technology is there. It is within your grasp. It has been here for quite some time. The transformation has to be in people. We have to be onboarded, There will be, and after some time, there will be a clear set of winners and losers. People who will have been onboarded or who will, transform themselves. It's not just transforming factories or supply chains. So, for example, I used to work with an aluminium producer, and So your supply chain is digitized. You're getting real-time feedback. But are you able to ingest that? Suppose you have 10 kinds of products and you're getting the feedback in real time that which product is selling more and which is not. You might have committed more resource into producing something that is not going off the shelf. And if you don't ingest that information, if you have not made your organizational decisions, congruent with those real-time inputs, then you might have committed, alumina in the furnaces already for the products which are not selling. So you have the digital system, you have a supply chain which is robust, but you're not able to ingest. So that feedback loop is useless for you. So supply chain, we all have heard of examples, like in energy, ports, inventory, FMCG. But I'll give you a different kind of example, which is, like around 1 year ago, we met a client. I mean, they had a problem statement. It was a Bollywood film studio. And they had a problem. The problem was that their movies are not working. So everyone knows about this, people say that movies from South India are working, but movies made in Bombay are not working anymore. So the problem they had was that we don't know what to do. I mean, we don't understand what we are doing wrong. We are making movies just as we used to make. But they are not being well received. I mean, when we crunched the numbers, we saw that the footfalls, the earnings per screen for those movies have been gradually decreasing over the last decade. So we asked them, I'll take the name of Netflix, Amazon Prime, Disney, 21st Century Studios. What do you think? What kind of business are they in? So they took a pause, and they're big shot celebrities, everyone knows them. And they told they are in the business of entertainment. So they are not in the business of entertainment, they are in the business of data. That is what they are doing. So that is the gap, They don't have the feedback mechanism. When we ask them, how do you take a decision that there's a script and you have 20 scripts? And on which script do you go out and make a movie, invest 100 crores? So they say that, we go by our gut. And they say, don't underestimate our gut. It has worked for so many decades. We are artists, we understand, what audience likes to see. But the audience is changing very fast. So they don't have any feedback loop. So I had an opportunity, and this, proves what we see in the world, is that we had an opportunity to visit a much smaller film studio in Hyderabad. And they had a team invested in blockchain. They had a team working on making a NLP, natural language processing engine, to process scripts. They were carrying out sentiment analysis of all the comments being posted about all the movies on internet, so that they understand what audience likes and what it does not. And then pushing that back into their NLP to greenlight scripts on which they would invest. So now you see, people say why South Indian movies are working, because they have that digital mindset. They are open to technology. They're always looking for, how to use data. I was astonished. I mean, and in Bollywood, if you ask the people, no one is doing that. So hence you have the result. A big industry is vanishing or, decreasing in size, but a new one is disrupting. So one thing I wanted to focus on was the challenges that on the ground, as Kamal sir was pointing out that, the consultants are not able to contribute because they come, they prescribe you something. And I completely agree with him that the era of straight-jacket solutions, that you just give a solution and it will be implemented, is over.
From my side, I'll raise the first question and I'll request a panelist, at least one or more of them to take this up. We have been discussing so much about the VUCA world and the disruptions, etc. Now we have just gone through the phase of COVID and everything has kind of recovered. But there is always this constant worry that COVID or something similar might strike again. So, what do you think are the most important lessons that we have learned with respect to supply chain management and the use of technology for handling supply chain disruptions during the time of COVID that we can utilize if something similar happens again? So, what are your perspectives or your thoughts on how can we future ready with whatever lessons we have learned during the volatility and ambiguity and uncertainty and complexity of COVID? Over to you, panelists.
Thank you, Dr. Bose, for the question. I'll take the first stab at this. With technology, I think there are a lot of emerging trends in digital twinning, I think like Milind was speaking about. There's a lot of simulation and gameplay which is happening. There are many startups which are emerging in this area. And in fact, large consultants like us are also dedicating a lot of resource in predicting the next outage of the world. May it be another pandemic, may it be another war. How do you sustain your supply chain, your livelihoods across the spectrum of geographies, businesses? So, doing digital twinning or gameplay, scenario playing out, these use a lot of computational power, and I think that's available today. And artificial intelligence, deep learning networks are helping create those scenarios and be ready for the future. And that is why all of you would hear, and the students might too, is the resilient supply chain. How will it sustain period of breakages and period of stoppages, and how can you, I think Aditya was speaking about that if a fruit is going bad, when it has to reach a certain point, can it be diverted for edible masses? I mean, it can go to some place else where it does not go waste, which is another problem to solve. So these technologies are working over time, creating sentient organizations, and because data is 24/7, so the models also are. And getting these insights over a period of time helps you in predicting a bit of the future. Not like an astrologer does, but I think a more scientific approach. Aditya or Kamal sir?
So, I mean, as you can imagine, we run 24/7 mission critical industries, right? So whether it is the, electricity supply, right? So electricity supply has to go on 24/7. We also supply to hospitals and so on. So, right, so you cannot compromise with that. So during the whole COVID period, there was not a single day our office was closed, right? And we had people coming in, doing their jobs, making sure that some parts like airport also continued, but maybe at a much smaller scale, okay? But business continued. We had to take extreme steps of, quarantining maybe the entire plant staff so that they don't get affected and the plant operations doesn't, get affected. Now, of course, there were a lot of learnings for us in terms of, SOPs were created in future if we are able to not access a site during, and COVID is probably once in a lifetime kind of a scenario maybe, but a more recurring scenario for us is things like cyber attack, right? Again, cyber warfare, I'm no expert in that. That seems to be the way wars will be fought in future, right? So if someone sitting somewhere is able to penetrate Indian grid, electricity grid, and destabilize the entire grid, that's enough to bring the entire country down for quite a few days. Or, attack on our airports or our seaports, right? So for us, that's an equally important high impact scenario, and worst thing is it can occur much more frequently than COVID. So there are a lot of actions being taken internally. How do we make our sites resilient, right? So that they can work in isolation. We can, just switch off the internet connection and continue working inside that bubble. Okay, that's one of the big thing that we are doing. Another one is probably the reverse of that, right? The ability to run the plant from any location, and that is where a lot of the things that I was earlier talking about, like unmanned substation, remote control of our plants. So that's the opposite view of making the plants self-resilient. And I think both situations we need to take care of. So if for some reason we are not able to access a particular site, how can we run it remotely or from another site? So a lot of such actions we are taking to make sure that in future we are not dependent on any one particular location to run our operations. Yeah. Thank you.
Just one small point to add. Um, Earlier in software businesses and many businesses, we always used to have a thought process of business continuity, thinking about disaster recovery, thinking about what if scenarios. But I had a feeling, personally as well as talking to a few people, that while some of the what if scenarios people felt that this could happen, but there were other scenarios while they were on the checklist, there were only half measures of attempt to simulate or attempt to think ahead that if really this happens, then how things would pan out. Would it be really business as usual or not? COVID has taught us, and some of the major cyber attacks have taught us. I happened to be in Copenhagen when the NotPea attack completely crippled Merck's, right? It is such a digital company, it's such a large company, right? It's probably more than the GDP of multiple countries, but it was completely crippled. There were no ships that it could load. It's because everything is digital. So the whole IT infrastructure has been just shut down. The CEO had asked it to be shut down because there has been a malware attack. Now, how do you recover from that, right? Even a day before, if we would have asked the head of security of Merck's that what if your system shuts down? While that is on paper, I'm sure he or she would have been thinking that, what is really the chance of this happening, right? So COVID and some of these attacks have taught us, please don't underestimate the probability of some of these things happening, right? It can. And there is a challenge of circular interdependence, right? Merck's couldn't recover for a few days. It was completely shut down because it's a circular thing. Even the manual loading cannot happen because that also is partly dependence on some technology. So there is no single method left if the whole infrastructure is gone, IT infrastructure, right? Similarly, COVID taught us that there are, parts of businesses which are so people dependent and so dependent of people being near each other that is very difficult. Of course, we found out ways. So we just have to rethink and be very serious that each of these scenarios, whatever be the perception of probability, there is a concrete chance of it actually happening. Thank you.
So I feel that we have very important lessons to learn even from the pandemic, that happened, and which will help us prepare for the next pandemic. I'll point out only two examples that had this pandemic happened 10 years ago, we would not have been able to roll out the vaccines so early. This would have taken at least thrice the time. Because today we have the technology, we have the processing power that we can run different simulations and develop this kind of vaccine in just a matter of months. So this would not have been possible a decade back. So that is something, how we deployed our capacity and technology. The second is that in one of the instances of COVID scare or limited outbreak in Shanghai, the Chinese were able to test 8 million people in just 2 days. Just imagine the scale. Is this possible without the capacity and the investment and the commitment they have towards this, digital tech or the advances they have acquired? Now, the failures, there were a lot of failures. For example, we have all heard the instances of mass migration of people without any modes of communication. Trains full of passengers going to a different state altogether with the COVID patients and migrants. Do you think I think in Ahmedabad we also have a center of logistics excellence. So if we will have that kind of capacity being deployed in the logistics sector, these kinds of problem, these are large scale, human suffering. And this can be alleviated by capacity building in these critical sectors. Thank you, Professor.